Chapter 1. The setup. Sarah Morgan had never been the kind of woman who dated for sport. She didn't swipe right because she was bored, and she didn't go out with men just to score free cocktails and Instagram-worthy selfies. Dating for her was intentional, a deliberate choice, not a pastime. Her friends didn't get it. "You're impossible," Jenna declared, stabbing her fork into a salad like it had personally offended her. "You want a guy who's confident but not cocky, funny but not a clown, ambitious but not obsessed with money. Do you hear yourself?" Sarah smiled, unbothered. "Yes, and I stand by it." Across the table, Mia rolled her eyes. "You're 28, Sarah. At this rate, you'll be 80 and still waiting for Mr. Perfect." "I'm not looking for perfect," Sarah said calmly, swirling her iced tea. "I'm looking for someone real. Someone who knows who he is without needing to prove it to the world." Jenna snorted. "Good luck finding that unicorn." Sarah didn't argue. She'd heard it all before, the lectures, the warnings, the jokes about her future as a cat lady. But she wasn't worried. She'd rather wait for the right man than settle for someone who treated dating like a barter system. "I buy dinner, you owe me something." Her phone buzzed on the table. A text from her mom lit up the screen. "Mom, big news. Call me when you're free." Sarah sighed. "Here we go," she muttered, excusing herself from the table. Her mother answered on the first ring, voice bubbling with excitement. "Sweetheart, guess what?" Sarah braced herself. "What?" "We're going to Vegas." Sarah blinked. "Vegas?" "Yes, family trip. Us, your dad, and—" Her mom's tone turned suspiciously casual. "The Jacksons." Sarah froze. "The Jacksons? As in David Jackson's parents?" "Of course. You remember David, don't you? You two were inseparable that summer at the campsite." Sarah vaguely remembered a boy with sandy hair and a mischievous grin, but that was decades ago. "Mom, it'll be fun. Shows, dancing, great food. And the hotel is gorgeous. We booked the honeymoon suite for you and David. Oh, don't worry. It has 2 bedrooms." Sarah nearly dropped the phone. "The honeymoon suite. The hotel was full," her mom said breezily. "Besides, you're both adults. It'll be fine." Sarah pinched the bridge of her nose. "You're trying to set us up." "Set you up? No. We just thought it would be nice for you two to reconnect." "Aha." Her mom laughed. "Just pack something fabulous. You'll thank me later." Sarah hung up, staring at her phone like it had betrayed her. Vegas, with David Jackson, in a honeymoon suite. She wasn't stupid. She knew exactly what her parents were doing. The question was, did she care? Chapter 2. David's world. David Jackson had never understood the appeal of chaos. His friends thrived on it. Wild nights, loud music, endless hookups. But David? He preferred quiet. A good book. A decent cup of coffee. Maybe a game night that didn't end with someone passed out on his couch. Tonight, though, his apartment was anything but quiet. His best friend, Tyler, was sprawled across the armchair, grinning like a man on a mission. "Vegas, man," Tyler said, tossing a poker chip he'd brought for dramatic effect. "You're going. No excuses." David raised an eyebrow. "Vegas? Why?" "Your parents are planning some big family thing. They told me to make sure you don't bail." David smirked. "You're working for my parents now?" "Only because they promised me free drinks if I get you on that plane." David shook his head, amused. "What's the occasion?" Tyler shrugged. "Something about old friends catching up. Sounds boring. But hey, Vegas." David's phone buzzed. A text from his mom. "Mom, can't wait for next week. The Jacksons and Morgans together again. It'll be just like old times." David frowned. Morgans? That name tugged at something in the back of his mind. Then it clicked. Sarah Morgan. The little girl who used to follow him around at the campsite, clutching a stuffed rabbit and asking endless questions. He smiled faintly. That was a lifetime ago. Tyler leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Dude, you're going to meet her again. Maybe she's hot now." David shot him a look. "Seriously?" "What? I'm just saying. Childhood friends, Vegas, honeymoon suite." David froze. "Honeymoon suite?" Tyler grinned. "Your mom might have mentioned it. 2 bedrooms, though. Don't freak out." David groaned, rubbing his temples. "They're trying to set us up." "Obviously," Tyler said, laughing. "And honestly, you could use it. You've been single forever." David didn't argue. He'd been single because he refused to play games. He wasn't interested in being someone's backup plan or part of a rotation. He wanted something real, the kind of love that made you want to be better, not just look better. And maybe, just maybe, this trip would be different. Chapter 3. Childhood flashback. The memory came back in fragments. Sunlight filtering through pine trees, the smell of campfire smoke, and the sound of laughter echoing across the lake. Sarah was 4, David 5, and for one perfect summer they were best friends. Sarah remembered clutching her stuffed rabbit, hopping along the dirt path as David led the way to the dock. "You're walking too fast," she complained, her tiny legs struggling to keep up. David had turned, grinning, his hair sticking up like he'd wrestled with the wind. "You're too slow," he teased, then held out his hand. "Come on." She'd taken it without hesitation. That summer was a blur of adventures. building forts out of fallen branches, roasting marshmallows until they were charred, whispering secrets under a blanket of stars. David had taught her how to skip stones, though hers mostly plopped into the water with a sad splash. "You'll get it," he'd said, patient even then. "Just keep trying." And she had. Every day. Because David believed she could. Now, decades later, Sarah sat on her bed, staring at the open suitcase. The memory felt like a dream. Soft edges, warm colors, but it left her with a strange ache. She wondered if David remembered too. Across town, David leaned against his kitchen counter, scrolling through old photos his mom had sent. There they were, two kids grinning with marshmallow-streaked faces, arms slung around each other like they'd conquered the world. He smiled, shaking his head. "Crazy," he murmured. "Feels like yesterday." But it wasn't yesterday. It was a lifetime ago. And next week, they'd meet again. Not as kids chasing fireflies, but as adults navigating a world far more complicated than summer camp. Chapter 4. Arrival in Vegas. The hotel lobby was a sensory overload, marble floors gleaming under chandeliers, slot machines chiming like impatient children, and the faint scent of expensive perfume mingling with cigarette smoke. Sarah Morgan adjusted the strap of her carry-on and tried not to look as overwhelmed as she felt. Her mother, of course, was in her element. "Isn't this fabulous?" Linda Morgan gushed, spinning slowly like she was auditioning for a travel commercial. "Vegas has changed so much since we were here last." Sarah smiled politely. "It's bright." "Bright is good," Linda said, winking. "Bright means fun." Behind them, David Jackson trailed after his parents, his expression calm but amused. He caught Sarah's eye and offered a small smile, the kind that said, "I know exactly how ridiculous this is, and I'm surviving it too." She almost laughed. The check-in desk was a battlefield of luggage and chatter. Their parents handled the details while Sarah and David stood off to the side, like two diplomats waiting for peace talks to conclude. "So," David said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "how long before they start dropping hints about wedding chapels?" Sarah smirked. "I give it 24 hours. "Optimistic," he said, grinning. "I was thinking 15 minutes. She laughed, and for a moment, the chaos around them faded. It was easy talking to him, easier than she expected. No forced charm, no cheesy lines. Just normal. "Okay." Linda's voice cut through the noise like a trumpet. "Rooms are ready." Sarah followed her mother toward the elevators, David falling into step beside her. "So," he murmured, "are you ready for the big reveal?" "What reveal?" she asked, suspicious. He tilted his head toward their parents, who were practically vibrating with excitement. "You really think they booked us separate rooms?" Sarah's stomach sank. "Oh no." "Oh yes," David said, his tone dry. "Brace yourself." The elevator ride was short but felt eternal. When the doors opened, Sarah stepped into a plush hallway lined with gold-trimmed mirrors. Her mother handed her a key card with a flourish. "You and David are in the honeymoon suite." Sarah froze. "The what?" Linda beamed. "It was the only thing available. Isn't that romantic?" Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Mom." "2 bedrooms," Linda added quickly, as if that solved everything. "Plenty of space." David leaned against the wall, his expression unreadable except for the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Well," he said, "that explains the champagne bucket I saw on the cart." Sarah shot him a look. "Don't." "I'm not saying a word," he replied, clearly enjoying himself. Their parents bustled off to their own rooms, leaving Sarah and David standing in front of a door with a gold plaque that read honeymoon suite. Sarah exhaled slowly. "This is insane." "Completely," David agreed. "But at least it'll make a good story." She slid the key card into the lock, and the door swung open to reveal a space that looked like Cupid had exploded inside. Heart-shaped pillows, rose petals on the bed, a jacuzzi tub big enough for 6. Sarah groaned. "Oh, for the love of—" David stepped inside, surveying the scene with mock solemnity. "Well, they didn't hold back." "No kidding," Sarah muttered, tossing her bag onto the nearest chair. "I'm half expecting a violinist to pop out of the closet." David chuckled, then turned to her, his expression softening. "Look, if this is too weird, we can talk to the front desk." Sarah shook her head. "They said the hotel's full. No other rooms." "Ah," he said, nodding. "So, we're stuck." "Pretty much." He smiled, easy and unbothered. "Then let's make the best of it." Sarah studied him for a moment, surprised by how calm he was. Most guys would have made a joke, something suggestive, something awkward. David didn't. He just accepted it. "Okay," she said finally. "Ground rules." "Ground rules," he echoed, amused. "Hit me." "No weird comments," she said firmly. "Define weird," he teased. She narrowed her eyes. "You know what I mean." "Fair enough," he said, holding up his hands. "Anything else?" "Stay out of my bathroom." "Deal," he said, grinning. "Anything else?" She hesitated, then smiled despite herself. "Don't hog the remote." David laughed. "Now that's a serious rule." Later, after they'd unpacked and settled into their respective rooms, Sarah stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair. She could hear faint music drifting up from the strip, the hum of life outside their bubble. And she thought about David, his calm voice, his easy smile, the way he didn't make this awkward even though it absolutely could have been. Maybe this week wouldn't be so bad after all. Chapter 5. First night out. The restaurant was a kaleidoscope of color. Velvet booths, golden chandeliers, and a live jazz trio playing in the corner. Sarah sat across from David at a long table crowded with their parents. Menus spread like maps to treasure. The air buzzed with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Linda Morgan was in rare form, telling a story about her college days that had Sarah silently praying no one asked for details. David's father, Mark, was laughing so hard he nearly spilled his wine. Sarah leaned toward David, her voice low. Is it just me? Or do they get louder every time they're together? David smirked. It's not just you. I think they feed off each other. Sarah chuckled, then glanced at the menu. What are you getting? Something safe, David said, scanning the options. I don't trust anything that comes with quotation marks around the word steak. Sarah laughed, the sound slipping out before she could stop it. You're ridiculous. Ridiculous and cautious, he said, grinning. It's a survival strategy. She shook her head, smiling despite herself. He had that easy humor, the kind that didn't feel forced, didn't feel like a performance. Just natural. Dinner was a whirlwind of conversation. Their parents reminisced about college pranks, shared embarrassing childhood stories, and made not-so-subtle comments about how nice it was to see Sarah and David together again. Sarah tried to ignore the heat creeping up her neck every time someone said together. David handled it better than she did. When Linda teased, "You two look good side by side," he didn't flinch. He just smiled and said, "We make a great seating arrangement." The table erupted in laughter, and Sarah found herself laughing too, even though her stomach was doing somersaults. After dessert, the group spilled out onto the strip, neon lights painting their faces in shades of pink and blue. Their parents were buzzing with energy, talking about catching a late show. Sarah and David exchanged a glance, the kind that said we need an escape plan. David leaned down, his voice just for her. If we don't break away now, we're going to end up front row at a magic act. Sarah grinned. Lead the way. They slipped out of the crowd and wandered down a quieter side street, the noise of the strip fading behind them. For a while, they walked in comfortable silence, the night air cool against their skin. So, David said finally, how's the honeymoon suite treating you? Sarah groaned. Don't remind me. He laughed. I think the rose petals were a nice touch. Nice touch for who? She shot back. Cupid. Hey, at least they didn't hire a violinist. Yet, Sarah said darkly. The week's not over. David chuckled, then glanced at her, his expression softening. You know, I'm glad you're here. Sarah blinked. Really? Yeah, he said simply. I wasn't sure what to expect, but this is nice. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, unexpected and a little terrifying. It is, she admitted. They walked a little farther, passing a street performer juggling flaming torches. Sarah stopped to watch, her eyes wide. That's insane. Impressive, David said. But insane. She laughed, and he smiled, watching her. Not the performer, not the crowd, just her. And for a moment, the noise of Vegas faded completely. Later, back at the suite, Sarah kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the couch. David dropped into the armchair across from her, loosening his collar. Well, he said, we survived. Barely, Sarah muttered, but she was smiling. David leaned back, his gaze steady. Tomorrow, we ditch the group earlier. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You planning our escape already? Absolutely, he said, grinning. I'm thinking sightseeing. Just us. Her heart skipped, but she kept her tone light. Sounds like a plan. And as she headed to her room, she realized something she hadn't expected. She was looking forward to tomorrow. Chapter 6. The Spark. Morning sunlight spilled through the sheer curtains of the honeymoon suite, painting the room in soft gold. Sarah sat at the small dining table, nursing a cup of coffee and scrolling through her phone. She wore a simple tank top and jeans, her hair still damp from the shower. Comfortable, unpretentious, exactly how she liked it. David emerged from his room a few minutes later, barefoot, wearing a gray t-shirt and dark jeans. His hair was slightly tousled, like he'd run a hand through it instead of bothering with a comb. He looked relaxed, effortlessly so. Morning, he said, his voice warm but casual. Sarah glanced up. Morning, coffee's over there. Lifesaver, he said, pouring himself a cup. So what's the plan? Another day of parental supervision. Sarah smirked. Not if I can help it. David grinned. Good, because I was thinking we ditch the group and do our own thing. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You planning another escape? Absolutely, he said, leaning against the counter. I hear there's a great art exhibit at the Bellagio. Or we could just wander and see where we end up. She hesitated, then smiled. I like wandering. Wandering it is, he said, his grin widening. Give me 10 minutes. The strip was alive with color and sound, street performers juggling fire, tourists snapping selfies, the distant hum of slot machines spilling out from open doors. Sarah and David walked side by side, their steps easy, their conversation flowing like water. "So," Sarah said, "what's the worst pickup line you've ever heard?" David chuckled. "Oh, that's easy. Are you a magician? Because whenever I look at you, everyone else disappears." Sarah groaned. "That's awful. Awful and real," he said, laughing. "Guy used it on a friend of mine. She almost disappeared just to escape." Sarah shook her head, smiling. "That's why I hate cheesy lines. They're so fake." David glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "You like real." "Always," she said simply. "If you can't be yourself, what's the point?" He nodded slowly. "I get that." They stopped at a fountain, watching the water dance in the sunlight. Sarah felt the breeze lift her hair, and for a moment, she was aware of everything. The sound of laughter nearby, the warmth of the sun, and David standing just close enough that she could feel his presence without touching. "You know," he said quietly, "I think that's what I like about you." Sarah turned, surprised. "What?" "You're real," he said, his voice steady. "No games. No pretending." Her chest tightened, unexpected and sharp. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she laughed softly. "Well, thanks." David smiled, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them felt charged, like the hum before a storm. Later, they found a quiet cafe tucked away from the chaos of the strip. Over iced coffee and shared pastries, the conversation deepened. Books they loved, places they wanted to see, the kind of life they imagined for themselves. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was simple, honest, and somehow that felt more intimate than anything else. At one point, Sarah reached for her drink and her fingers brushed David's. Neither of them pulled away. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Something that made Sarah's pulse quicken and David's breath catch. He smiled, slow and deliberate. "You know," he said softly, "this might be the best part of the trip." Sarah swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, I think so too." That night, back at the suite, Sarah lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every moment. The laughter, the quiet conversations, the way David looked at her like he saw something worth seeing. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Chapter 7. Exploring Vegas. The sun was dipping low, casting a warm glow over the strip as Sarah and David stepped out of the hotel. The neon signs were just beginning to flicker to life, promising a night of spectacle. Sarah adjusted her crossbody bag and glanced at David, who was studying a street map like it was a puzzle. "You know," she said, "most people just wander." David looked up, grinning. "And most people end up lost." Sarah laughed. "Getting lost is half the fun." "Spoken like someone who's never had to ask a guy dressed as Spider-Man for directions," David said, folding the map and tucking it into his back pocket. "Fine, we'll wander." They started down the strip, weaving through crowds of tourists and street performers. A man in a glittering Elvis costume crooned into a microphone, while a woman in a feathered headdress posed for photos. Sarah shook her head, amused. "Vegas is something. Something is one word for it," David said. "Chaotic is another." "Chaotic can be good," Sarah countered. "Keeps things interesting." David glanced at her, his smile softening. "You like interesting." "I like real," she corrected, her tone playful. "Interesting is a bonus." He chuckled. "Noted." They wandered into a small art gallery tucked between two massive casinos. The quiet was a relief after the sensory overload outside. Sarah paused in front of a painting, a swirl of blues and golds that looked like a storm frozen in time. "It's beautiful," she murmured. David stepped beside her, studying the piece. "It feels alive." She turned to him, surprised. "You noticed that?" He shrugged, a faint smile on his lips. "I like things that make you stop and think." Sarah felt a flicker of something, admiration, curiosity, maybe more. Most guys she dated barely noticed the art on a restaurant wall, let alone stop to appreciate it. They moved through the gallery slowly, talking about colors, shapes, and the strange titles artists gave their work. At one point, David made up his own title for a painting, a chaotic splash of reds and blacks. "Monday morning traffic," he declared solemnly. Sarah burst out laughing. "That's terrible." "Terrible but accurate," he said, grinning. Later, they found themselves at a street vendor selling oversized pretzels. Sarah ordered one, and David insisted on paying. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he replied easily. "I want to." She studied him for a moment, trying to find the catch. There wasn't one. No smug smile, no expectation. Just simple kindness. They sat on a bench, sharing the pretzel and watching the world go by. A street magician nearby was performing card tricks for a small crowd. Sarah leaned closer to David, whispering, "I bet he's hiding cards up his sleeve." David smirked. "Or he's an actual wizard." Sarah laughed, and the sound felt different this time. Lighter, freer. She realized she hadn't laughed like this in months. As the night deepened, They wandered back toward the hotel, their steps slower now. The strip glittered behind them, but Sarah barely noticed. Her mind was on the man walking beside her. The way he listened, the way he made her laugh without trying, the way he seemed so comfortable in his own skin. David glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I'm glad we did this." "Me too," she said softly. He smiled, and for a moment, the air between them felt charged, like something was about to shift, but neither of them moved. Not yet. Back at the suite, Sarah kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the couch. David dropped into the armchair, loosening his collar. "So," he said, "what's the verdict? Vegas adventure. Success or failure?" "Success," Sarah said without hesitation. "Definitely." David grinned. "Good. Tomorrow we top it." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You planning something?" "Always," he said, his tone teasing but warm. And as Sarah headed to her room, she felt that same flicker of hope she'd felt yesterday, only stronger now. Chapter 8. Vulnerabilities. The suite was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the faint sounds of Vegas nightlife drifting through the window. Sarah sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling through her phone without really seeing the screen. Her parents had gone to a late show, leaving her and David alone for the evening. David emerged from his room, barefoot, holding 2 bottles of water. "Peace offering," he said, handing one to her. Sarah smiled faintly. "Thanks." He dropped into the armchair across from her, his posture relaxed but his eyes thoughtful. "You seem quiet. Just tired," she said, though that wasn't the whole truth. She was thinking about him, about this strange week, about how easy it had been to laugh with him today. Too easy. David studied her for a moment, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah set her phone aside. "Sure. Why do you think dating feels like a game now?" His tone was curious, not cynical, like everyone's keeping score. Sarah blinked, surprised by the question. "Because they are," she said after a moment. "At least that's how it feels. Like every date is a transaction. What can you offer? What can you get?" David nodded slowly. "Yeah, I felt that too." She tilted her head. "You?" He gave a short laugh. "You sound surprised." "I guess I just thought you'd have it easier," she admitted. "You're, you know," she gestured vaguely, embarrassed. David's brows lifted, amused. "I'm what?" Sarah rolled her eyes. "You're good-looking. You're normal." "Normal," he repeated, grinning. "That's a glowing endorsement." She laughed, and the tension eased a little. "You know what I mean." "I do," he said, his smile fading into something softer. "But looks don't make it easier. If anything, they make it harder sometimes. People assume things." "Like what?" "Like I'm looking for hookups," he said simply. "Or that I'm not serious." Which couldn't be further from the truth. Sarah studied him, her chest tightening. "You're serious?" "Always," he said, his voice steady. "I'm not interested in games. I want something real." The words hung between them, heavy and honest. Sarah swallowed hard. "Me too." David leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I had this relationship a few months ago. Thought it was going somewhere. Turns out, I was just one guy on her roster." Sarah winced. "Ouch." "Yeah," he said lightly, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of hurt. "I walked away. No drama. But it makes you think, you know? About what you really want." Sarah nodded, her voice quiet. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately." He watched her, his expression open, patient. And I want someone who's comfortable in their own skin," she said slowly. "Not someone who needs to own the room. Just someone steady. Someone real." David's lips curved into a faint smile. "Sounds familiar." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Maybe." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not awkward, but charged. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, feel the weight of his gaze. She wanted to look away, but she didn't. David spoke first, his voice low. "You know, I think that's why this week feels different." Sarah swallowed. "Different how?" "Because," he said, his eyes holding hers, "I don't feel like I have to pretend with you." Her breath caught. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words tangled in her throat. So she just smiled, small and genuine. "Me neither." They ordered room service and ate on the couch, knees almost touching. Conversation drifted from childhood memories to favorite books to the ridiculousness of their parents' matchmaking scheme. At one point, Sarah reached for a napkin and her fingers brushed David's. Neither of them moved away. David looked at her, his voice soft. "You know, this might be the best part of the trip." Sarah met his gaze, her pulse quickening. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think so too." Chapter 9. The turning point. Breakfast was supposed to be simple, coffee, eggs, maybe a quiet conversation. Instead, Sarah found herself sitting at a table in the hotel cafe, while her mother enthusiastically described wedding chapels on the strip. "They have drive-through ceremonies now," Linda said, eyes sparkling. "Isn't that adorable?" Sarah nearly choked on her orange juice. "Adorable? Mom, that's Fast food marriage. David, seated beside her, bit back a laugh. Do they give you fries with that? Mark Jackson grinned. Probably onion rings. For symbolism. The table erupted in laughter, except Sarah, who was too busy glaring at her mother. You're not serious. Oh, of course not, Linda said, waving a hand. But it's fun to imagine. Sarah muttered something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like fun for who? David caught it and smirked, leaning closer. You okay? She shot him a look. Define okay. Not plotting an escape route, he said lightly. Yet, she replied, her lips twitching despite herself. After breakfast, Sarah and David slipped away under the guise of checking out the shops. In reality, they were escaping the parental wedding fantasy hour. They ended up in a quiet cafe off the strip, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus. Sarah stirred her iced coffee, her thoughts tangled. Do you think they'll ever stop? David grinned. Not a chance, she groaned. Great. He studied her for a moment, his expression softening. You know, they're not wrong about one thing. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Which thing? That we get along, he said simply. Her heart skipped. We do, she admitted, her voice quieter now. David leaned back, his gaze steady. I wasn't sure what this week would be like. Honestly, I thought it might be awkward. And? She asked, trying to sound casual. And it's not, he said. It's easy. Sarah swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. Yeah, she whispered. It is. They spent the afternoon wandering through boutiques and art installations, laughing at overpriced souvenirs and sharing stories about childhood summers. At one point, Sarah stopped in front of a display of vintage postcards. These are beautiful, she said, picking one up. David smiled. You should get one. She shook her head. I don't collect things. What do you collect? He asked, curious. Sarah thought for a moment. Memories, I guess. David's smile widened. Good answer. Later, as they walked back toward the hotel, the conversation turned quieter. Less banter, more honesty. Do you ever wonder? Sarah said softly. If we're too different? David glanced at her, his brow furrowing. Different how? I don't know, she said, shrugging. Life goals, priorities. He considered that, his expression thoughtful. I think differences can be good, as long as the important things line up. Sarah looked at him, her chest tightening. And what's important to you? David didn't hesitate. Respect, trust, someone who makes me want to be better. Her breath caught. That's a good answer. He smiled faintly. What about you? Sarah hesitated, then said, someone real, someone steady. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just them. The hum of traffic fading, the neon lights blurring into nothing. Sarah felt something shift inside her, something she couldn't ignore anymore. Back at the suite, Sarah kicked off her shoes and sank onto the couch. David sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Neither spoke for a long moment. Finally, David said quietly, you know, I think this week might change things. Sarah turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. Me too. And for the first time, neither of them looked away. Chapter 10. Conflict. Sarah stood by the window of the suite, staring at the glittering Vegas skyline. The city pulsed with life, music, laughter, lights, but inside, her chest felt heavy. She replayed the words she'd overheard an hour ago, each one cutting deeper than the last. Yeah, man, she's got standards. Like Olympic-level standards. I'm just trying not to trip over the bar she set. David's voice, light joking, followed by his friend's laughter crackling through the phone speaker. Sarah hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She'd gone to grab her jacket from the living room when she heard him talking. And now every laugh felt like a punch. She turned as the door opened. David walked in, phone tucked in his pocket, his usual calm smile in place. Hey, you ready for dinner? Sarah forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sure. He paused, sensing the shift in her tone. You okay? I'm fine, she said quickly, moving past him toward the bedroom. Just need to grab my bag. David frowned. Something was off. Sarah wasn't the type to hide her feelings, at least not with him. He waited until she returned, her movements clipped, her gaze avoiding his. Sarah, he said gently. What's going on? Nothing, she replied too fast. Let's go. He stepped in front of her, blocking the door. Talk to me. Her jaw tightened. Why? So you can make another joke about my standards. David blinked. What? I heard you, she said, her voice low but sharp. On the phone, laughing about how high my bar is. Realization hit him like a slap. Sarah, no. That wasn't what? She snapped. You sounded like every other guy who thinks women should lower their expectations. David's chest tightened. That's not what I meant. I was joking with my friend because he was teasing me about what? About how hard it is to date someone who knows what they want. Her eyes flashed, hurt and anger tangled together. If that's a problem, David, you could have just said so. He took a slow breath, fighting the urge to raise his voice. Sarah, listen to me. I wasn't mocking you. I respect you. More than anyone I've met in a long time. That's why I'm here. She crossed her arms, defensive. Then why joke about it? Because that's what guys do when they're nervous, he said, his tone raw now. I was trying to keep it light. I didn't think you'd hear it, and I didn't think it would sound like that. Her anger faltered, replaced by uncertainty. Nervous? About what? David stepped closer, his voice steady but soft. About you. About how much I like you. About the fact that this, he gestured between them, feels different. And that scares me. Sarah's breath caught. The fight drained out of her, leaving only confusion and vulnerability. You, like me. He gave a short laugh, almost bitter. Yeah, a lot. And if I ruined that because of one stupid joke, then I'm an idiot. Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Sarah looked at him, really looked, and saw the truth in his eyes. No arrogance, no games, just honesty. She exhaled slowly. I don't want to fight. Me neither, he said quietly. But I need you to know. I wasn't making fun of you. I admire you for having standards. It's rare. Her lips curved into a faint smile. You're sure? Positive, he said, his voice firm now. Sarah, I'm not here to impress you with lines or pretend I'm someone I'm not. I'm here because I want to see where this goes. Her heart thudded, the tension melting like ice under sunlight. Okay, she whispered. David reached for her hand, tentative but hopeful. She let him take it, and just like that, the storm passed, not with fireworks, but with quiet honesty. Chapter 11. Resolution. The suite was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. Sarah sat on the couch, her knees drawn up, staring at the muted glow of the lamp. The argument, if you could call it that, still lingered in the air like smoke. She hated how sharp her words had sounded, hated the way her chest still felt tight. The bedroom door opened, and David stepped out. He looked tired, not angry, just worn down. He crossed the room slowly, stopping a few feet away. Can we talk? His voice was low, careful. Sarah nodded, her throat dry. Yeah. David sat on the edge of the armchair, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, quietly, I'm sorry. Sarah blinked. For what? For making you feel like I don't respect you, he said, his tone steady but raw. That's the last thing I'd ever want. Her chest tightened. I've heard that kind of joke before. From guys who think women should settle. It hit a nerve. I get that, David said softly, and I should have thought about how it sounded. But Sarah, he looked at her then, really looked. I wasn't mocking you. I admire you for knowing what you want. It's rare. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. You mean that? Every word, he said. You're not too picky. You're smart. You're strong. And honestly, he gave a short laugh, almost self-conscious. That's why I like you. Sarah's breath caught. You, like me. David smiled faintly. A lot. More than I expected. More than I probably should after 1 week. Her lips curved into a shaky smile. I don't think there's a rule about that. He chuckled, the tension easing just a little. Good. Because I was starting to worry I'd broken one. Sarah laughed softly, and the sound felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. David. He stood then, closing the space between them. Look, he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. I don't want to play games. I don't want to pretend this is just a vacation thing. I want to see where this goes. For real. Sarah looked up at him, her heart pounding. Me too. For a moment they just stood there, the air charged, their eyes locked. Then David reached out, slow and deliberate, his fingers brushing hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let him take her hand, let him draw her up from the couch. And then, finally, he kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It was soft, steady, like everything about him. Sarah felt the world tilt, felt the noise of Vegas fade into nothing. When they pulled apart, her breath was shaky, her smile unguarded. Well, she whispered. That was unexpected. David grinned. Unexpected good? Very good, she said, her cheeks warm. He laughed softly, resting his forehead against hers. Then I guess we're doing something right. They spent the rest of the night talking, really talking about everything and nothing. Childhood memories, favorite movies, the kind of future they imagined. No grand declarations, no promises they couldn't keep. Just honesty, just connection. And for Sarah, that was enough. Chapter 12. Goodbye or beginning. The last morning in Vegas arrived too soon. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting golden stripes across the suite's carpet. Sarah stood at the window, watching the city wake up, tour buses rolling down the strip, early risers clutching coffee cups like lifelines. Her suitcase sat by the door, zipped and ready, but her heart felt anything but packed. Behind her, David emerged from his room, his duffel slung over one shoulder. He looked calm. Or maybe that was just him, always steady, even when everything else felt uncertain. Morning, he said, his voice warm. Sarah turned, forcing a smile. Morning. He set the bag down and crossed to the table where 2 untouched cups of coffee waited. Parents are downstairs checking out, he said. We've got a few minutes. Sarah nodded, her throat tight. A few minutes. That was all they had before reality came crashing back. Their separate lives, separate cities, separate routines. She hated how heavy that thought felt. David studied her for a moment, then spoke quietly. You okay? She laughed softly, the sound brittle. Define okay. He smiled faintly. Fair enough. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not awkward, but weighted. Sarah wanted to say something, something that mattered, but the words tangled in her chest. Finally, she managed. This week. It wasn't what I expected. David's gaze held hers. Me neither. She swallowed hard. In a good way. In the best way, he said, his voice steady. Sarah, I don't want this to end just because the trip does. Her breath caught. You don't. Not even close, he said, stepping closer. I know we live in different cities. I know it won't be easy, but I want to try. For real. Sarah stared at him, her heart pounding. You mean that? Every word, he said, his tone firm now. I don't do things halfway. If you're in, I'm in. She felt something inside her loosen, like a knot she'd been carrying for years finally unraveling. I'm in, she whispered. David smiled then, slow and genuine, and reached for her hand. She let him take it, let him anchor her in that moment. For the first time in a long time, she felt steady, certain. Downstairs, their parents were waiting, practically glowing with smug satisfaction. Linda clapped her hands when she saw them. So, did you two have fun? Sarah exchanged a glance with David, and for the first time all week, she didn't feel the need to dodge the question. Yeah, she said, her voice calm but sure. We did. David squeezed her hand, his smile easy. Best trip I've had in a long time. Their parents beamed, oblivious to the quiet promise hanging between them. Sarah and David didn't correct them. They didn't need to. This wasn't about parental plans or childhood nostalgia. This was theirs now, messy, uncertain, but real. As they walked toward the exit, Sarah felt the weight of the city behind her. The lights, the noise, the chaos. And yet, everything inside her felt clear. This wasn't goodbye. It was the beginning. Chapter 13. Epilogue. 6 months later. The backyard smelled like summer, fresh-cut grass, charcoal smoke curling from the grill, and the faint sweetness of lemonade. Sarah stood near the patio table, balancing a plate of fruit, while her mother fussed with a centerpiece of sunflowers. Linda, Mark said from the grill. It's a barbecue, not a wedding reception. Linda shot him a look. It's a celebration. Sarah rolled her eyes, smiling despite herself. Celebration of what? Before her mother could answer, David appeared from the side gate, carrying a cooler like it weighed nothing. He wore a faded navy t-shirt and jeans, his hair slightly mussed from the breeze. When he saw Sarah, his grin widened, the same easy, steady smile that had become her favorite sight. Hey, he said, setting the cooler down. Hope I'm not late. Sarah shook her head. Right on time. He leaned in and kissed her cheek, casual but warm, and Sarah felt the familiar flutter in her chest. 6 months, and that feeling hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened, like roots growing quietly beneath the surface. Linda noticed, of course. Linda always noticed. Her eyes lit up like fireworks. Look at you too, she said, clasping her hands. Just adorable. Sarah groaned. Mom. David chuckled, slipping an arm around Sarah's waist. I think she's proud of herself. She should be, Mark said, flipping burgers. This was her master plan. Sarah shot David a look and he grinned. Hey, I'm not complaining. They moved to the patio, settling into easy conversation with their parents. Felt different now. Less pressure, more laughter. Sarah watched David joke with her dad about grilling techniques, watched the way he fit so seamlessly into her world. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady, real, exactly what she'd wanted. Later, as the sun dipped low and fireflies began to flicker in the yard, Sarah and David wandered to the edge of the garden, away from the chatter. He took her hand, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. 6 months, he said softly. Feels like longer. In a good way, she teased. The best way, he said, his voice steady. You happy? Sarah looked at him, her heart full. More than I thought I could be. He smiled then, slow and genuine, and kissed her soft, sure, like the first time in Vegas but deeper now, anchored by everything they'd built since. When they pulled apart, Sarah laughed quietly. You know, they're probably watching us right now. David glanced toward the patio, where Linda was definitely pretending to rearrange napkins while sneaking glances their way. He grinned. Let them. They were right about one thing. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What's that? That this, he said, squeezing her hand, was worth the risk. She smiled, leaning into him as the night settled around them. And for the first time, she didn't wonder what came next. She already knew.